Hello and welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering a social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. I'm Hilary.salt.
And I'm Sebastian.moore.
And it's a momentous day today, isn't it? Exciting day.
I suppose so, yeah. Keir Starmer has just resigned,
Mm-hmm.
as people will know if they've seen the news. And hopefully we'll get this out today so it's relevant on the day that he resigns. And we now have our, seventh Prime Minister in 10 years
10
or
years,
something?
yeah.
Who's the longest serving Prime Minister of the last 10 years?
Oh, Boris?
Boris Johnson.
Oh dear.
Now his reign looks to be stable.
Yeah. I mean, Keir Starmer has resigned as Labour leader, hasn't he? He's not resigned as Prime Minister.
I think he's resigned as both.
No, I think he is still Prime Minister.
No, he's still Prime Minister, but he's signalled his intention
Yes,
to resign. Yeah. I mean, you can't, I don't think you resign and then say, right, I'm off.
Okay.
I'm going home.
That felt like
But
what...
he felt the king, and
yes.
yeah, he wouldn't just do that if it was only Labour leader.
Right, okay, yeah. David Cameron seemed to do that, didn't he? Just go, I'm off.
Yeah, I don't
After
remember,
the
actually. Was
referendum.
Did he hang around? I don't remember. It's weird because I think growing up, I was born in 96. Obviously, Blair, I don't remember anything before Blair. And that was quite a stable period.
It was.
Blair was in power for 10 years. And then it felt like, Cameron's reign was quite stable until the Brexit referendum.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that was kind of like the touch paper that just changed everything.
Absolutely.
And we're still dealing with the fallout and still in this political crisis that nobody can seem to negotiate.
Correct. So I think we're assuming that Andy Burnham will be our next Prime Minister, aren't we? Although I don't think that's guaranteed. There may well be a challenger.
It will be Andy Burnham. It is guaranteed.
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to... There might be some Labour MPs that are thinking, there's a democratic process. We should have the chance to challenge. But realistically, I think we accepted this and we said it on the podcast that if Andy Burnham won Makerfield, which he did last Thursday, the by-election near us, then he would be the next Prime Minister.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty obvious. I've said the last few days, I said there's not going to be a leadership election. I really think that they will coalesce around Burnham, and there'll be internal arguments made about the fact that it will look, we need to put a united front out there so that we can have our best chance of defeating reform. Streeting will be offered a top job. I reckon Foreign Secretary. That's the standard one, isn't it? When you want to get rid of your political rival, you give them Foreign Secretary, which is a prestigious job.
Yeah.
But then they've got to go off around the world. You don't have to see them.
Yes. Well, we'll put that to the test, I guess, over the next few weeks and months.
So the question then, and I think this is kind of what you want to talk about, is what is facing Andy Burnham when he becomes Prime Minister, and what will his leadership look like?
So the big question, which is on lots of people's lips this morning now, is where does the Burnham versus the markets battle end up? So you remember that last year he wrote an article which said we shouldn't be in hock to the bond markets, and lots of people criticised that, and then he kind of backtracked a bit. He also at one point said he didn't really agree with the fiscal rules. He was going to rip those up. And then he said he was going to obey the fiscal rules. And it does seem that there's a real inability on the part of the ruling class, if you want to call it that, to stand up to markets. So why is that? That's what I want to talk about, is why is that and where might it end up?
So what are these fiscal rules then? These are rules that Rachel Reeves came up with herself?
Well, some of them have been a bit more long-standing than that. So, the Tory government had the fiscal rules as well. So there's a fiscal stability document, agreement that was signed, I think, in autumn last year, which set out these three rules. And the three rules, they're couched in very technical language, but they are fairly straightforward. One is that you will balance the books. So you will make sure that your income is at least equal to your expenditure by the end of a kind of 3-year period. And in Rachel Reeves's budget, that does happen. It's right towards the end of the 3-year period. So that's the first rule. The second rule is that you will reduce overall debt. So those two kind of go together, really, because
surely if you're
you
if
can't
you're doing
reduce
one,
debt. Yeah. If you're
bound to do
doing
the
one, you
other.
should do the other. Yeah, absolutely. Unless you use that surplus to do something else. But
like what? Because
well,
then wouldn't it become expenditure?
build a
And then
hospital.
would that not be classed as expenditure?
It would, and this is some of the things I want to come on to as to whether
Okay.
that's sensible for it to be just classed as expenditure.
Right.
But yeah, those two rules go together, I think, balancing the budget and paying down the debt, which I think people can kind of grasp that those make a lot of sense. And there's also a third one that people don't talk about very much, which is there's a cap on welfare spending. It's not all welfare spending comes into that cap, but it's something like 200 billion maximum spend on welfare. Some aspects of the welfare spend.
And what would go underneath? Like what would that be
Things
classed as?
like predictable welfare spending, so pensions, things that are coming. But if there were a rise in universal credit because there were a downturn, that's not included. But most welfare payments are included in that.
Is pensions welfare?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I would argue that pensions are an entitlement that you've built up by paying your national insurance contributions, but they're under the welfare budget, you might say. So those are 3 fiscal rules. Why do we have those fiscal rules? Well, partly because markets would object if we don't. And I think you might remember some of these numbers from when we did the videos on the budget earlier this year. So, was it last year?
Last year.
That was last year, wasn't it? Yeah.
November, I think.
Yeah. So we spend about 125 billion on servicing our debt.
Yeah, just explain that for
Yeah.
people if they're not aware.
So we owe the total amount that we owe because the government has borrowed that money from the markets. And our total borrowing is something like 95% of GDP. So it's just under 3 trillion. I was going to say billion then, 3 trillion. Our GDP is just over 3 trillion. So those things are quite close to each other. That's our total GDP. And what we do to borrow that money is the government issues a bond, we call it gilt, that goes on the market and people buy that gilt. And then the government...
IOU.
It's an IOU. Yeah. And the government then promises as part of that IOU, I will pay you each year a certain amount of dividend interest on that IOU. So the rate at which bonds trade is an indication of the rate at which people are willing to lend money to the government.
Yeah.
And that at the moment, I think on Friday, it ticked up a bit to about 5.5%. I've been watching it this morning. It's actually not changed very much. So I think it's kind of priced in that this was going to happen. That's 5.5% on a 30-year bond. So that's maybe a bit higher than the 20 or 10-year rates that people often watch. You remember that after Liz Truss's budget, there was a big rise in gilt yields. I think the 30-year yield at that point was about 5.1. So we're, quite significantly above that now. But what's not happened quite as yet this morning, we're probably hostage to fortune in terms of when this podcast goes out. But last time I looked, it hadn't changed very much from Friday. So we're about 5.5%. Now, that's quite a bit more than other countries pay. So, France and Germany, probably somewhere below 4% that they pay on their debt. Why is it higher for us? First of all, I think there's an expectation of higher inflation rates in the UK. And partly that is due to some of the problems we've talked about before, which are things like the high cost of energy. We have the highest cost of industrial energy in the world, don't we? And the fact that we haven't improved productivity. If you improve productivity, that drives prices down, and we've not been able to do that. So we have higher inflation. If you have higher inflation, people want a higher yield on their bond. So if you have a bond and you earn 5% on it, but inflation is 3%, you're only really getting 2% from that bond. Because, the first 3% is eaten up by the fact that everything costs more. So your real rate of return is the difference between the bond yield and inflation. So the higher inflation is, the more people expect on their bond return. So the fact that UK inflation is higher is the reason why we pay higher rates than some other countries. Second reason, perhaps a bit more technical reason, is that a really big chunk of UK debt is owned by overseas owners. So, international banks and other governments and international investors. I think about 40% of our debt is now owned overseas. Depends on whether you include in the bottom line what the Bank of England owns or not. If you include in the bottom line what the Bank of England owns, it's probably only about 30%.
Okay.
So the fact that overseas investors own a lot of our debt means that they are very, you might call it hot money. So, if they can get a bigger return somewhere else, they move it around, or a better return somewhere else. So it's quite volatile. So, they are likely, if they have worries about the UK, to sell our debt. And if the price of debt goes down, the yield on it goes up. So the fact that there's a lot of overseas owners that has some impact on the yields we pay. If you look at it as for example, if you compare us to Japan's debt is largely owned in Japan.
It's massive.
And it's massive,
like
bigger than ours.
Something percent of GDP.
Absolutely, yeah.
But it's not such an issue.
Because people are willing to buy it. And one of the things that was an issue for a long time is that there's a question as to whether government can make banks buy UK debt. And certainly under the old EU solvency rules, there was a bigger requirement for banks to buy UK gilts than there is now. It's not that different, but it was a little bit different. And the third reason why we pay more for our debt is just because there's a big question mark over whether people think the UK is a sensible place to invest, or whether it's a bit too basket case, you might say, for people to choose to invest their money.
Mm.
So for all those reasons, we pay more in our debt than other countries do. So I'm just trying to get back on the narrative. We were talking about Burnham versus the markets, weren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems then that it's important for any leader coming in to make sure that gilt yields don't rise and rise.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sort of interested to know why. I think we've covered this before, but why Liz Truss was kind of turfed out of office when gilt yields were at 5.1% and now they're at 5.5%, and it doesn't seem to be such a talking point.
Yeah.
But I suppose that a leader doesn't want gilt yields to rise, because then to do anything costs a lot, because if you want to borrow, it's going to cost a lot of money. The interest you're paying on your debt increases.
Yeah.
I've said it's already, 120 billion, which is more than we spend on defence, more than we spend on education. However, these fiscal rules, a lot of people will say they put Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, in a bit of a straitjacket, because it stopped her from doing things that a Labour government might want to do. That's
right. So you're right that any incoming Prime Minister and incoming Chancellor of the Exchequer, because we might get a new one of those as well, who knows, will really want to make sure that they don't cause a really big spike in gilt yields. And just to go on your Liz Truss question, the real problem, I think, with Liz Truss was that bond yields massively spiked up very, very, very quickly. And there are some technical problems in the market that means that you kind of almost create a vicious cycle where the more they go up, the more people have to sell bonds. And when they sell the bonds, the price goes down and the yield goes up again. And so things kind of snowball out of control. And that was what was happening when Liz Truss was Prime Minister. Bond yields are 5.5 now, but they've kind of crept up slowly and predictably, and it's not been a big market shift overnight. They have just crept up to the levels that they're at now. So I think that's why it's not been as big an issue as it was when Liz Truss was in office. But you're right that it's a big question for any incoming set of politicians? How do they handle all this? And I do think there are ways that you can. I'm not saying Andy Burnham should come into power and just spend, and spiral markets out of control. That's absolutely not what you want. But I do think there are ways that you can build a narrative that says that there are some ways in which you can spend that are productive long term and will help the country, rather than just limping along as we are now. So this is where it gets a little bit technical. But at the moment, a lot of the fiscal rules and the OBR analysis, the Office for Budgetary Responsibility analysis, is based around a measure that's called Public Sector Net Financial Liabilities, PSN. Public Sector Net Financial Liabilities, PSNFL. It doesn't quite trip off the tongue, does it?
No.
Now, that's a bit of it's always seemed to me that that's a bit of an odd thing to measure. So, to give you an example of why it's odd, if government were to borrow £10 billion, say, and use that to build housing, let's say, £10 billion worth of housing, what that would do is it would add 10 billion to the measure, the Public Sector Net Financial Liabilities measure. But the £10 billion of assets that you as a government hold in housing doesn't affect the balance sheet. So in other words, that doesn't affect the way that the market looks at you as a country. Now, that's a bit odd, because if you were a company and you did exactly the same thing, let's say it's probably a bit smaller, but let's say you're a company and you borrow £10 million worth of bonds, corporate bonds rather than government bonds. So you issue a bond, you've got £10 billion in the bank. You've got a liability of £10 billion. That's balance sheet neutral, because you've got £10 billion of cash, £10 billion on your balance sheet is a liability. Those cancel each other out. If you then use that £10 billion to build something, a factory or even housing, if you're a housing developer, that's still balance sheet neutral, because you've got 10 billion liability and you've got £10 million asset. And it's really odd that when you're looking at government, those same rules don't apply. So the way you would look at that, one of the ways that you assess the value of a company is you assess what you call its covenant. So, its ability to repay its debts. And you would say that borrowing £10 million and having an asset worth £10 million is probably positive on your covenant, because in terms of the money's cancelled out, but you've now got an asset that's going to generate you income. Mm. And as long as you're generating income that's more than the interest you're paying on the debt, you've actually made the company worth more. Mm. You've strengthened its covenant. So why does that not work the same way for governments? Go on, you put your hand up. You have a question. Question at the back.
I've got maybe an answer. Is it that when you give the example of housing, it's very complementary to the metaphor of business, because we can sort of value a house very easily and say it costs this amount to build a house, this is what the market value would be. Whereas governments do things which normal businesses wouldn't do, and there's not a competitor. And so we were talking about HS2 a while back. If you put 100 billion into HS2, I mean, what's the value of HS2? What's the value of that track? You can't just sell it as a government. That's not, an asset in the way that a business would have an asset that they could just sell. Is that part of the answer?
Possibly, but businesses build infrastructure and then they have it on their balance sheet. Our water companies, when they build a reservoir, that reservoir's on their balance sheet. They don't say it's not worth anything now.
And is it on their balance sheet for the amount of money that they put into it?
Well, as long as they built it in a way that it was worth that.
But is that the problem? Because with something like HS2, because this is what I was thinking right from the start when you said about, we were talking about this right at the start. You said about spending money on something that's actually worth something rather than just, wasting money.
Yeah.
But the problem is within a project that might seem like, I would say, infrastructure, railway spending, that's a brilliant use of money.
Yeah.
And yet some of that will go to a planning application that's 3 miles long.
That's true.
Literally, if you printed it out, that's how long it goes on for. 100. I'm trying to think of how much they spent now. I want to say it was 100 million on the Bat Tunnel. I might be way out, but a lot of money on something like the Bat Tunnel.
Yeah.
Some of that could be just completely frivolous spending, and it's all tied into a wider project that's hard to sort of distinguish.
That's true. And I think there are some, I mean, I used the example of housing. There's some specific issues on housing. So if you're government or if you're a local authority and you own housing, you have to sell it to a tenant under a right to buy scheme, and you suddenly lose that asset, so you no longer have it. So, I think you do. That's in my argument a good argument for state ownership. That you shouldn't be giving away state assets. You should be able to have those assets on your balance sheet. And I mean, you're suggesting that it's not easy to value infrastructure, and to some extent that's true. But the way that generally a business would value that is how much income can I generate from it. They wouldn't look back at what did we spend on the Bat Tunnel. They would look forward at what can we charge customers to travel on this line, and what kind of an income will that produce for us, and is that more than the cost of the borrowing? And that would then add to the value of your business.
But I suppose it's not a direct relationship like that of the business and customer one. And something like HS2, the government would argue, even if it's not going to pay for itself in rail fares, it will in economic growth in different parts of the UK. So it becomes much more complex, right?
It does. I mean, I'm not saying these things are easy to value, but somebody who agrees with me that maybe there's better ways to do it is the IMF.
Okay. I thought you were going to say Andy Burnham, but okay.
Yeah, possibly he does as well. But the IMF...
The International Monetary Fund.
The International Monetary Fund, yeah, which does a lot of comparisons across different countries of how they how they assess their economy. And they say that they prefer measures that look at public sector net assets. So that look at, in that example I gave where you spend £10 billion building houses, you would look at the value of those houses as part of the balance sheet, the overall balance sheet of the country. And so you wouldn't say that, spending £10 billion on building houses makes you £10 billion worse off as a country. They would say that's neutral. Or even, a good thing, because if you spent, as we know, we spend so much on things like housing benefit, and if that housing stock is owned by government, we make savings there.
Would it lead to a government potentially making some claims like, we've spent £100 million on this anti-racism campaign, and that's an asset that goes on the books?
Yeah, so I think you've got to be robust in your measurement of these things. And perhaps one of the things that is quite a positive thing is that Andy Burnham seems to be building a bit of an economics team around him. So do you remember Andy Haldane?
Oh, yeah, familiar name.
Yes, he was the ex-deputy governor of the Bank of England.
Right, okay.
And he wrote some stuff that I've quoted as being really good about the real problem for the UK is lack of productivity. He talked about there's a long trail of businesses that are kind of just about managing, that, are not producing productivity gains. And it's that long tail of very poor companies that are reducing overall productivity for the UK. So we like him. There's a couple of other people on his list. Jim O'Neill, don't know if you remember him. He was, I think he was an advisor to George Osborne. So, probably somebody you think of as a boo person. But, having him in your team, I think, will give the market some confidence that you're not going to just be profligate in public finances. Richard Hughes, remember that name? He was an ex-governor of the LBR, or leader of the LBR. I can't remember whether that's quite the right term, governor. I think he was the chair of the LBR. Now, on one hand, you might say, well, these are all people from the old economy, from, the old failed neoliberal state. But I think, you've got to be, as somebody who's got to give the market confidence. I think you probably have to have some of these people involved. And I think if you can use their knowledge to kind of really weave a compelling narrative that says, what we're going to do is we're going to not abide by those old fiscal rules because we've abided by them for 20 years and they've not done us any good. What we need to do is develop a new set of rules that perhaps is a bit closer to what other countries do, that would allow us to spend in productive ways that really push forward our economy. And I think if you can do that, and you can also be really robust about it, so make sure that the things you're spending money on are really productive things, productive assets, and not the kind of things that you were suggesting. I think, you could persuade markets that you're heading in the right direction, while still at the same time creating space to do some of that perhaps innovative stuff that would allow us to start pushing forward infrastructure and, building the economy.
And therefore breaking the fiscal rules as they're currently laid out, but reassuring markets and giving them confidence that you have an idea of what you're doing with the economy.
Exactly.
Okay. And this may be what you want to give as an answer, what you've just said. But I was thinking, what would you say if you're Andy Burnham and you give your first speech at the lectern outside Number 10, you've just been made Prime Minister? Like, what is the first thing you say? How do you give an outset of what your leadership would look like?
I think I would say something along the line. I don't pretend to be as good a communicator as Andy Burnham, by the way. And I'm sure you'll say something far more rousing than this. But I would say something along the lines of, we can't just carry on doing what we've been doing for 20 years because it clearly doesn't work. We've got to find a new way of building the economy, a way that shares the wealth around the country, isn't just dominated by London and the London outskirts, in a way that does rebuild our industry, in a way that gives people meaningful work, in a way that drives forward productivity. And that will mean some people making sacrifices. It will mean, for example, that some of the unproductive things that we spend money on now, we stop spending money on them. It will mean being clear about the fact that we need a functioning economy, which, for example, makes use of our North Sea oil, builds nuclear power so that we have affordable power to build industry and to heat our homes. And that does mean a paradigm shift from where we are now. And that will mean winners and losers. But we've got to have a national debate and a discussion that allows us to really cohere around a new man on the moon kind of almost mission that perhaps is that every person will have an affordable home. I mean, I could get on board with that.
I think that's a really good answer. I was going to give my answer and now I don't want to. Mine wasn't as articulate as that.
Oh, well, that's good. I'm sure Andy will be working on it on the train down to London.
Do you know what I think he should say, regardless of policy position? And you set out a really good sort of, I would say, and us as Social Democrats, members of the SDP, we sort of believe in those policy principles which you laid out. But I'd say forgetting policy, I think what he should say is his first thing is this merry-go-round of leaders coming in, having a crack and then leaving, this charade that British politics has become, this ends now.
Great.
Right? That would be like, wow, okay. And make it clear that he's not in this for the prestige of being Prime Minister and for the status, and then to do it for a year and sort of go, okay, now I'll go and get a fancy private sector job, but that he really wants to turn the country around. And it would then, that's the interesting thing about that would, by assuming the position that he's in this for the long run, it would actually start to not make it about him, because then it would go beyond him and he'd say, it's not about me whether I'm Prime Minister for 10 years. It's about setting out a platform that can start to rebuild that political sphere where we can have really good, solid arguments being contested and then visions being carried out rather than this revolving door.
Sounds great. I'm sure there'll be a job for you in Andy's administration.
You're welcome to get in touch. I mean, I can always turn you down. If you're listening, Andy, then, you know, our advice, we are offering it to you for free.
Free and gratis, yeah.
Did you hear, you watched Starmer's resignation speech this morning?
I had on the radio.
Okay. Oh, well,
that's the difference between us, isn't it?
I don't have a radio. There was something interesting. So he did what all resigning politicians do, which is wax lyrical about their achievements, which we might just be used to because it's kind of what they do. Yeah. Realistically, I don't know why. I don't actually know why they do that. Is that to give reassurance to the next leader that the Labour Party's in good stead? Because other than just being a boasting thing, I don't know why. Every resignation letter, every resignation speech is, this is what I've achieved. And it's almost like an ego thing of reassuring themselves that they've actually achieved a great deal for the country.
Yeah.
I don't know. But anyway.
I mean, the only thing it said to me was that how disconnected he is from real life, because actually things have got so much worse over the past 2 years. Why does he think they've got better? So
it mirrors a lot of what we discuss about democratic deficit, about our political class being out of touch. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think he knows how bad things are. But the fact that his speech was just, it felt like it was from a different reality to the one we're living in.
Exactly.
I was with some friends last night and we were talking to somebody that's visiting the country, an Australian, and he was asking us about the political situation, and the group that I was in, very different politics, but we all agreed on the fact that the UK is in a really, really bad situation. It's almost the only thing we can agree on, you know, within that political spectrum. People on the left, people on the right, people in the middle seem to all agree that we're in dire straits as a country. And then for the Prime Minister to come out and go through these things, it just felt delusional. I was watching it thinking, that sounds like a nice country, the one he's describing. Yeah. You know, the economy's great and all of these problems are not an issue. Two things caught my eye because of what I wanted to discuss on the podcast today, which was small boat crossings falling, asylum hotels closing in his list of accomplishments. And I thought that's interesting because a lot of people on the left, quote unquote left, for them, they would say that's not an issue. You know, the small boat crossings, the asylum hotels. And him recognising that is a recognition that for any Labour government to win, they know that they need to get a hold of those issues. Yeah. And Burnham, I think we've seen that, the way he discusses it and the way his language has changed in recent years. And you'll have noticed that because he was contesting a seat in Makerfield, which Reform were the biggest challengers, his language was very much more accommodating to people that might want to vote Reform. Yeah. And my left-wing friends, you know, we're all involved in lots of different discussions, aren't we? And one of my left-wing friends' discussions was around, I can't believe he's saying that Shabana Mahmood might keep her job. Which I was thinking, I think that's a good call. Yeah, it's interesting. So Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, who from the outside, I think that she is much closer to the median British voter about concern for immigration and such. And yet people on the left and Labour Party members who are going to elect the next leader, they are she's very unpopular with them. Correct. Which is fascinating. It is. Yeah. And she's in a difficult position. And we have some friends in Blue Labour. Yeah. Blue Labour is, I don't know how they describe themselves, but I would say a slightly more socially traditional version of Labour. Maurice Glasman started it. But some influence within the Labour Party. And at the point we've kind of said to them is that Shabana Mahmood can do stuff that is broadly popular as a policy with the median voter, but the median voter doesn't recognise that because it's tainted with the Labour brand. Yeah. And we'll get into some of the stats on on immigration, but I wanted to focus on illegal immigration and particularly the asylum hotel protests.
Okay.
Because last week, when I was cycling back from church in the centre of town, I came along Wilmslow Road, and there's a hotel there where they are housing asylum seekers, and there's quite often a protest, and we've seen them around Greater Manchester. I know there's quite a big case in Altrincham, which is not too far from you.
Correct.
And I found it a fascinating thing. So I think it's the first one I've ever witnessed or been to, spoken to people. And I had a bit of time, so I thought, go on then, I'll stop and chat. And the first side of the road that I spoke to were the people protesting the asylum hotel. And they're waving St George's crosses and British flags. And that's because I was on that side of the road, right? So I sort of just said, oh, what's going on here? And there was a thing, and I think we talked about it briefly last week, but it came up, I think 3 times in 2 days, this notion that when talking to somebody about an issue, you should already be up to date with all the facts. I think this is a very 2026 thing.
Yeah.
Right, that we assume that people should go online and get their information before conversing in public. And I'm completely opposed to that.
Agreed.
I think that when we remove the need for social interaction and from learning from other human beings, then we're going down a really bad path.
It also suggests you need to research it so you know which tribe you're in.
Exactly.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That's part of the issue. And a lot of we talk about with the breakdown of the political, which maybe we'll get onto. So the first thing I said is like, oh, what's going on here? And the guy's like, oh, come on, mate, you don't know what's going on here. I'm like, well, I can guess, but like, tell me about it. And he's like, oh, have you not done your research? I'm like, what? But then he kind of wandered off, and I got chatting to some others, and they were very friendly, mixed, but the ones I spoke to broadly very friendly, had some really interesting conversations with them, and kind of was interested to know I think this is always what I'm interested to know, where are their concerns that they might be a little bit uncomfortable with their position. And particularly I wanted to know because whilst I agree with some of their concerns about illegal immigration, I find the idea of protesting at an asylum hotel quite unsavoury. Perhaps I'm just too soft. But I'm aware of the fact that there will be quite vulnerable people amongst those asylum seekers, and to be met with this protest outside, that doesn't make me super comfortable. So I chatted to them for probably half an hour or so, and then thought, I really need to go across to the other side of the road. And on the other side of the road, there was a much larger group of people, mostly in a line, sort of blocking the hotel. And they were all but one person out of the 30, 40 people had masks or
I hate that.
Yeah, balaclavas on.
Yeah.
Which I found really intimidating.
Yes.
They were flying mostly Palestinian and pride flags, with one guy right at the far end flying a St George's cross with refugees welcome written in the middle. And I said this to both sides, and I sort of said the same things, interesting to both sides, and the same challenges, that the first side I spoke to was less intimidating because they didn't have their faces covered.
Yeah.
They're flying the flag that represents me,
yeah,
the Union Jack, that is the country I belong to. And the other side were a lot more intimidating, and they had signs, and they generally weren't being vocal. And I will say that the first side were much more abusive in the sort of shouting across at the people that were blocking the asylum hotel. And I spoke to them for a bit as well, and tried to the guy with his face uncovered was the only one that wanted to speak to me. And yeah, it was interesting, and I think it fits in with a lot of what we've been discussing recently, which is that it's mostly vibes.
Yes.
A lot of it's vibes, and I think if you get underneath that and start to break it down, you can see that there's good reasons why both camps are there. That's the contestation that I will make, because the second camp, the one that are blocking the asylum hotel, they are believing that they're standing up against racism, and I honestly think that I am opposed to racism. if I believed, and I genuinely think that they believe that they're standing up against racism, then they're doing the right thing. If that's what they believe, right?
But if they are doing what they believe, why do they have to cover their faces?
So I asked him about that, and he said, well, I'm black, so I'm already screwed. But he said the others, what happens is these people on the other side of the road, the ones with the Union Jacks. And by the way, the Union Jack, there's this thing about it can only be called a Union Jack at sea. Do you know about that?
Well, I think that's a bit. It's a bit pedantic. I think
it is, and now it's apparently now you can call British Union flags Union Jacks. So I'm starting to get on board with that trend.
Yeah, yeah.
I just don't want the pedants watching to go after me in the comments. And so he said that the people waving the Union Jacks, they would film the protesters and put it on social media and dox them. Do you know this term, doxing?
Say who they are.
Say who they are and where they live.
But if they think they're standing up for the right thing, why should they care?
And he said that employers will take issue with it. And I said, don't you think that the other side would care more about that?
Yeah.
And he sort of shrugged.
I think that's nonsense.
Yeah, I was surprised by that, and I do think that I do think if you're going to protest, you have to have your face uncovered.
I agree,
because it's like, well, if you're brave enough to go out and protest, and it is scary,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
then you should have your face uncovered. You should be brave enough to do that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to go through a couple of the claims that they were making and just try and give a bit of a broad summary of where we're at now, because I think it's this sort of thing that, I mean, we haven't checked in on illegal immigration in a good while.
We've not, no.
And so it's worth doing. So small boat crossings falling. I'll show you a graph and I'll pop it up on the video. Small boat crossings. So this is a graph showing the cumulative number of crossings for the year prior to each recorded date. And you can see that there's this big spike around 2022, which is the post-COVID wave, where after COVID there was a lot of boat crossings across the channel. And then it dipped slightly, but it's gone back up. And I think Starmer is talking about this little fall here.
So where does that...
that is the peak, was at sort of the tail end of 2025.
Okay.
And the year prior, for the first 6 months of the year, is showing a slight decrease.
Okay.
But there's nothing to say that that's going to carry on decreasing. You can see the graph going up and down. So, I mean, that is tenuous as a claim.
I agree.
And we're talking about, 45,000 people crossing the channel illegally every year. Small boat crossings make up about 88% of illegal entries into the UK. So there will be a lot of people that are here illegally, but they will have come in legally and overstayed visas. But in terms of illegal entries, I think small boat crossings are vast majority.
Oh, are they? I thought it was the other way around, that the vast majority, that people's focus is on the crossings. But actually, it was more people who overstay visas.
Yes, but that's a legal entry.
Ah, so right. Okay.
In terms of illegally entering the country, the vast majority is small boat crossings. There are some that come across in vans.
Yeah. Understood.
And some at airports when they get into the country, but they've not got the right visa on arrival.
Okay.
The vast majority then, well, I was going to say the vast majority, all then apply for asylum.
Yeah.
It's supposedly it's about 99%. I'm wondering who the 1% is that says, "Oh no, it's wrong. I'll head back."
I think I think when I last looked at this, it was something like 85% are successful at the first attempt, and then that goes up into the higher than 95 after the appeals.
Interesting, that's not true anymore.
Oh, is it not? Right. Okay.
Yeah, so that was true.
Yeah.
Around 2022, that peaked.
Okay.
And it was about 80%.
Right. Okay.
That were, like you say, successful at the first attempt. Now it's interesting, about 42%.
Oh.
Yeah, so it's decreased massively, and that's partly the reforms that Shabana Mahmood has made since being Home Secretary. This is obviously, and I think we just need to contextualise the why this is an issue, because a lot of the immigration debate gets conflated and confused. And whilst I think that illegal immigration and legal immigration are very much linked and they very much impact each other for various different reasons. I think it's worthwhile separating the issues
Absolutely.
so that we can discuss them in the proper way.
Yeah.
The protests, and this is where I think a lot of people get this wrong, that particularly when we're operating in the political realm and we're on political Twitter and we see things. I think the people that are protesting, their real laser concern is on illegal immigration. And interestingly, the people I spoke to at this protest, quite a few of them weren't concerned about legal immigration. Now, that's anecdotal, and I'm not saying that's true for everybody. And I think we've spoken about this as real concerns with legal immigration, but just focusing on illegal immigration because it is the issue that kind of gets to the heart of the problem. It's the one that is visible. It's the one that has like an emotive level connected to it. You know, we see the news articles every day. So it's the one that kind of, it identifies it sort of symbolizes the breakdown of the state. Because
Agreed.
the sort of fundamental level of what a state is, it's an area with borders, with boundaries. And if you can't control those boundaries and you're allowing people to come in and not enforcing them, that really rubs people up the wrong way. And so a big factor affecting how Burnham, if he does become Prime Minister, gets on, it will be illegal immigration as an issue.
Yeah. So are we saying, in terms of Mark and Keir's homework, that he claims to have reduced illegal immigration? We think that's a bit of a tall tale.
One of the policy ideas for deterring illegal entries into the country, was to have this one in, one out scheme. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
It was implemented with the French. So the idea being that anybody that crossed the border from France, we would send them back to France, and we would take another person that had not attempted to enter the country illegally. So we're not by sending them back, we're not further affecting France because we're taking somebody in their place.
Yeah.
But supposedly it's to deter people from crossing. I think there's a lot of issues with it. Total number is still fewer than 1,000 people have been returned via that, and you can see when we're up to 45,000 a year. I mean, it's a drop in the ocean, and there are real problems with that scheme. I think that it fundamentally it doesn't work, and it kind of doesn't work in a similar way that the Rwanda policy didn't work. Right? Is that from the outset you can see the issues with it. You know, my argument with Rwanda was always that you are not in control of that territory, so you don't get to say what happens to the people that you are sending there.
Yeah.
And that'll always be the breakdown. And you can have this, this agreement, but then we get back into sort of international treaties and, the sort of politics we've kind of left. And I mean, the UK, we've spoken about this before. I mean, SDP policy would be to create a detention centre on an overseas territory like Ascension Island, which the UK, we have that benefit of having these islands dotted around, and it would be doable.
Yes.
To do that. And by just saying and making it clear that anybody that crosses the border illegally is going to go to that detention centre, is not going to, be able to stay in the UK. You send that message, and it does create the deterrent. But the important thing with the deterrent is you have to be able to. You can't allow them to call your bluff.
Exactly.
Because if you say, "Oh, the detention centre is only it will only hold 500 people," then they know that that you can't.
You're not serious.
Yeah, you're not serious.
Yeah.
So you just have to be serious about the issue, I think. A lot of the claims from the asylum hotel protesters, a lot of people that are concerned about this issue, revolve around crime.
Yeah.
The problem is the police don't record immigration status when arresting people.
Yeah.
And I sort of thought, well, why not? Couldn't they do that? And it does seem like it's not as simple as you might think, because that is a Home Office, that's Home Office information, and there would be that difficulty of kind of contacting the immigration authorities every time they arrested somebody to find out. And it's changing as well all the time, someone's immigration status. So I don't know. That's perhaps perhaps there's a way of doing that, but I'm not sure if it's doable.
I think there's a real problem. Certainly, I know from the Altrincham hotel protesters that there was an expectation amongst some of them that people were kind of being held in the hotel, and they kept wanting the police to make sure that they stayed in the hotel. And the police said, "Well, no, they're allowed to come out." And I think it's that kind of fundamental misunderstanding of what these asylum hotels are for that is part of the problem.
Yeah.
Certainly the one in Altrincham is kind of between two girls' schools, and it's largely single men. And I think that's what made the community very nervous about it.
So I wanted to do like a myth busting. I was going to lay out some myths, but we've already covered a few of them. So I'll bring them in when it's suitable. But you mentioned that a lot of it is single young men. There is a fundamental problem that both sides have alternate facts. And you could say that statement about anything, literally anything within the realm of politics at the moment. And this is the breakdown of the political, because when we fail to start to understand why people are on the other side of an issue, we start to strawman their arguments. We become more and more siloed within a group of people that understand us.
That's right. Yeah.
And you have this gulf, this chasm between you. And I mean, that was poetically displayed at this hotel protest the other day, because there was a literal road in between, and someone crossed the road at one point and the police were like, get back on your side of the road. And I thought they can't talk to each other.
Yeah.
They literally can't talk to each other. It was interesting. One of the claims from the sort of more pro-migration side is that, these are poor women and children crossing. And the other side will say, no, it's a single young men. It's predominantly men, predominantly adult men. So
I think they do tend to use different hotels. So some hotels they will use for families.
Exactly.
And some hotels they will use for single men.
Exactly. So 71% of people crossing the channel in the year, I think up to 2025 was 71% were adult men. Mm-hmm. And the children accounted for about 12 to 18%, and the rest were adult women. 60% originate from only 5 countries. So Eritrea, Afghanistan, Iran, Sudan, and Somalia, which is interesting. And before, I think that was Albania, until they had that agreement, which saw their small boat crossing numbers decrease massively. So going back to crime, it's difficult to know how much crime is committed by asylum seekers. Now, the people at the protest were claiming that, I would say they were exaggerating the amount of crime committed. Now, I don't know because I don't have the numbers, but I'd be willing to go out on a limb and upset a lot of people by saying that most asylum seekers do not commit crime. And you might think that sounds, how could he possibly say that? I'd say that by thinking it through rationally, it would seem crazy for it to be anywhere near the majority are committing crime. Partly because if you're an asylum seeker, you're trying to fly under the radar. Yeah. You're trying to get into the country because it is so economically beneficial. That's why so many people are crossing the channel. You have access to a welfare system, which is, it's
pretty
much better than
where
you've come from. Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm losing my strand here. Sorry, what was I saying?
You were talking about myth busting, and you're saying that people don't. How many people are single young men, and do they all commit crime?
Yeah, so most don't commit crime is what I would say, and I don't have hard evidence to back that up. I think that would make sense.
I think one of the things is there is no hard evidence. So
exactly,
there's a lot of discussion about you can use an evidence base to say which people are more likely to commit crime, but it's really difficult to actually do that, and there is no evidence base for that really. So partly because the police don't record people's status in crime statistics, but also partly because you don't know how many people are here in total. So there is a real issue with our population measurement, and partly because we don't, we intercept a number of illegal people coming into the country, but certain numbers we don't intercept. So when it's one of those actuarial things that I find people find it hard to grasp. If you say this many people committed a crime from this country, that doesn't tell you about how likely they are to commit a crime because you don't know the denominator of that fraction. And getting hold of that denominator is actually really, really difficult.
Yeah.
So there is not really an evidence base that you can use to measure and compare crime statistics in the UK across people from different countries.
Here's the counter to that.
Okay.
You don't need a denominator, is my argument, because if the numerator is bigger than 1, in terms of the number of people that are committing crime, then you've got a problem. These are people that are entering legally, and I imagine you'd agree with this. There's an argument I've had with people that are suggesting, why are people focused on the levels of sexual assaults from asylum seekers compared to when the majority is going to be from white men? Is an argument on the progressive left, and I say because these are people that shouldn't be in our country anyway. So
Yeah.
any number is a number that didn't need to happen.
Agreed.
And there's been a lot of high-profile cases that have stoked tensions in regards to this.
But that's not the same. Your argument, which is that even if there's only 1, it's 1 too many.
Yes.
That's not the same argument as saying you can prove that these people are more likely to commit crime than UK nationals, which I don't think you necessarily can.
One thing they do record then is nationality when it comes to incarcerations. And interestingly, so in the year, in the 2024 calendar year, 13% of cautions and convictions were given to non-citizens, and 12% of people aged 16 or over were non-citizens that year. So it seems like it tracks more or less the same number.
Yeah.
We have 10,000 foreign national offenders in our prisons, which is about 12%. Something like that, I think. I'm trying to remember the numbers. Yeah. So that's one thing we can measure, but we don't. Yeah. What we don't know is, are those the immigration status of the people that are committing crimes, and that's an issue.
Yeah, yeah, and I think one of the things is that the people, if you look at crime statistics for the UK population, you will get a number across the population, but that will include young men, old women, children, pensioners, everybody. Now, if you compare that with crime statistics for a particular country country's immigrants who are largely young men, you're not comparing light with light there. What you'd need to compare it with is the crime statistics for UK young men. And, because you're not doing the same comparison there, I think that's often quite misleading. So I'm really nervous around all these stats that people throw around. When you say, people have these different stats, I do think there's a lot of people who are choosing stats that don't necessarily add up. I think there was a Reform councillor came up with some number that was just absolutely, utterly made up. And nobody could find out where the number came from.
And I think that's because people are approaching this, and I noticed this within my own life. I think it can happen with us, like we're not immune to this, where you sort of decided which side of the argument you're on, and then you're searching for anything which backs that up.
Exactly. And nothing that doesn't, nothing that challenges it.
You see that with these hotel protests.
Yeah.
And I can understand the anger. I can understand the anger from both sides.
Yeah.
I really can. And when you speak to them, you can see they are genuine.
Yeah.
People are searching for their own facts.
Yes.
So I would say with something like this, you go back to the basics of, we have a problem where 45,000 people roughly are entering illegally. And I say illegally because that is what the UK government have deemed illegal. That's not subjective. And is that something we want? If it's not something we want, we have to kind of find a way of stopping it. And especially when you consider that some of these people that are crossing end up dying when they cross the channel. So this is not something we should want to continue, and any government should do everything they can to stop it, because it's such an important issue for the UK voters.
Agreed. So are you carrying on Keir's homework, or are you?
Sorry, the
said you
second
wanted
thing,
to
he's
look at-
right about the second thing in terms of asylum hotels closing.
Okay.
It does seem that trend seems to be one that is continuing. Not that you can tell what's going to happen in the future, but it was up at 400 and now it's around 160 asylum hotels in the country.
Okay. And where are those people going instead?
Well, that's the problem. HMOs, has multiple occupancy. So it's not necessarily an improvement.
Yeah. So I suppose all that leads back to the point you made at the beginning, which is that there seems to be a real gulf between what Keir Starmer seems to think he's achieved in 2 years and how the country is experiencing the last 2 years, which those two things don't seem to marry up too much.
Yeah, that's true.
Good
luck, Andy.
Good luck, Andy. Yeah.
I mean, I have my concerns, and I think he will quite quickly. A lot of people that like Andy Burnham, and there are a lot of people near where we live that like him. Because he was a popular mayor of Greater Manchester, but I think those people will go on a journey of falling out of love with him quite quickly, because he will be leading a dysfunctional Westminster government.
I suspect so.
And I hope that's not the case. I want him to succeed, because I want any Prime Minister to succeed.
Yeah.
Remains to be seen.
So good luck, Andy, and good luck, England, tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah.
World Cup wise,
Exactly.
fingers crossed.
Yeah,
and Scotland. Well, good luck, Scotland as well. They play later in the week as well, don't they?
They will play their third game against Brazil.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, very good luck, Scotland.
So if anyone's got any comments about what we've said today, do drop them below or send us an email. Shout at us if you wish.
Yeah.
Let's get the conversation going.
Yeah. And we'll see you again next week. Thanks for watching.